It's going to be a lot of subsurface talk. The first talk is my good friend from Diamondback, Baosheng, and we're going to just run 15 minutes presentations after that. With that, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Mrs. and the Whitson team. Good afternoon. I'm Baosheng Liang. I'm honored to present RTA quantification of operational sequence in a large scale development. Special thanks to my colleagues, Kelsey Call, Dylan Custer, Hannah Chitanda, and the Diamondback leadership team. This project was wrapped up over 1 year ago, but the insights are still fresh. Seems like a good idea that we keep getting better with the time. So let's dig in. This is the agenda. First, we will look at where the project took place and how this project, the DSU development, was carried out. And then I will touch on our data automation efforts, because manually wrangling well data is about as fun as herding cats, if you like. After that, we will dive into RTA results across 4 benches: Lower Sudbury, Joe Mill, Wolfcamp A and B. We wrap up with production response and what it all means for the future development strategies. The project was in a core area, Martin County, Midland Basin, Texas, where the rocks are rich, and I think barbecue is richer. Some frac operations are known to boost efficiency and cut costs, but we wanted to know what happens to production if you mess up with the timing. Specifically, how does the distance between wells affect performance? Does the order of turning wells online make a difference? The answer is yes, and we've got the data to prove it. Specifically, here is the gun barrel view of our 44 well development. Each square is 1 well, color-coded by the pad. So it's a green, yellow, blue, purple, pink. So in total, we have 5 big pads. This development are bound, develop offset wells from the east, from west. So the right side is east, the left side is west. This offset wells. Specific for this development, we started in the late December 2022, and we used the 2 summer frac crews and spent about 6 months to complete the whole development sections, 44 wells. These red box, basically the wells inside the red box, are under fracturing. The map view on the lower left, it shows the similar color. The idea is the map view and the bottom active timeline serve help to look at our chaos. I mean, it's really, we carefully orchestrated this sequence. Once the pad B, the first one, was completed, and then the frac crew moved to the next pad BL. Now the pad B was ready for plug drill out. The same color notice in the map view. So basically red for fracturing and yellow for plug drill out. It's like a game of basically frac tag, but with millions of dollars at stake. So now as operations continued, here we get pads WL on production, and WL is on the fracturing. And also notice we have also microseismic monitoring. Now pad BL moved to the plug drill out. Our first pad B was turned online. So pay attention to the distance. For example, 2,000 feet here means the distance between a well under fracturing in the red box and a well in production in the green box. It turns out distance matters, especially if you have your producing well that you don't want that keep feeling this elbowed by its neighbor. So on this stage, that we have our wells fracturing in this pads M1 and MO, and we started to drill out pads WL while the pad BL was popped. So if you look at the same color in the map view, so again, this green for wells on production, yellow for plug drill out, and then red is for the wells under fracturing. So this is the whole process as we progress. Final stage is as shown here. So our pads M2 was fracturing, pads MO and M1 now is for plug drill out, while the pad WL was turned online. Now notice that the distance between the pads M2 and WL is only 1,500 feet. So in summary, for this process, we spent about 6 months and using 2 simul-frac crews to look at this whole 44 well development, larger scale that for this whole part. I forgot to mention that if you look at the cube from the top to bottom, this part we handles Middle Siberian, Jomel, Lower Siberian, Wolfcamp A and B. So this is 5 benches for this whole cube development. Before diving into RTA results, let's talk about Diamondback Whitson, the data animation automation efforts. As mentioned earlier, managing data is more complex than alphabetizing spaghetti. So to do that, we built an entity model to basically represent well headers, production, deviation service, and wellbore data. Further, by using Whitson APIs, we automated data transfer, BHP calculations that result retrieval and back population into our databases. So the good thing is that the whole setup handles thousands of wells with basically 0 manual effort, unless you count that yelling at the keyboard and sending complaints to messages when the server crashes. Big thanks to Ping Puyang, Mark Watson, Whitson team, and our IT team to make it all happen. In this work, we used Whitson. In my view, Whitson doesn't just raise the bar of RTA, it redefines it. Here is our workflow. First, we gather and QC the pressure and the bottom hole pressure and production data. Second, map the frac hits and the well pop dates to understand the sequence. Third, run RTA to assess LFP and drainage volume, group wells, and quantify the well performance at the bench level. Because we only have 3 Middle Siberian wells in this section, so let's directly begin with our Jomel wells. Here on the right, we have plotted linear flow parameter LFP on the vertical axis against drainage volume on the horizontal axis. Each data point on the plot is 1 well, labeled by name, color-coded by the distance. Particularly, green 3,500 feet means the distance between this well and the nearest fraction well in the same bench. We realized that shorter distance significantly reduce drainage volume and conductivity. The lower left corner is cum oil curve for each well. There's a strong correlation between our RT results and actual cum production. Notably that our RTA was analyzed using 5 to 9 months production, while the cum curve reflects an additional year. It's always nice when your guess, here our RTA physical math agrees with the reality. This slide focuses on the wells landed in the Lower Siberian. The same setup of this plot with an addition of purple wells. So the green 3,500 feet, brown 2,500 feet, and purple 2,500 feet. That if you look at that, on the lower left, we get the cum oil curves. Essentially, we have a good agreement with this RTA and production. Now, let's move on to the deeper zone Wolfcamp A. On the Wolfcamp A side, if you look at we have the similar things, and particularly if you look at that for that conductivity, that part. So for the wells, or among the wells, 3,500 feet and 2,500 feet, they show similar things. If you go to the previous one, also for this Lower Siberian conductivity, doesn't change much for these different distances. But this drainage volume is very sensitive in the Lower Siberian. Now back to the Wolfcamp A side, for that 2,500 feet, 3,500 feet, these 2 distance scenarios, we also see similar conductivity among these different distances. But one well, the purple diamond, W5 stands out at just the 1,500 distance to this nearest fraction well. This well shows much smaller drainage volume and conductivity. Now, if you look at the down lower left, this cum curve, this well underperforms. Let's say where's Alejandro? So it's like Alejandro lost us his iPhone with a 3% battery. Our final bench is Wolfcamp B. So Wolfcamp B side, if you look at the drainage volume, this vertical side, drainage volume variation is narrow. Conductivity has a wide spread, indicating that the performance here is more sensitive to the stimulation effectiveness than just the drainage volume alone. Of course, actual production reflects both drainage volume and the conductivity. From this RTA study, that we observed a clear correlation between the offset well, the distance to offset fracturing, and the early time well performance. Burberry zones showed the strongest impact on conductivity and drainage volume. Activating offset wells influences well performance. So here is also supported by microseismic. As mentioned earlier, as the pad WL, we also had a microseismic monitoring there. The microseismic results also confirm this deformation pattern with the results. But the results are outside today's scope. But let's just say, listening to the rocks during fracturing provides a valuable piece of the puzzle. Finally, let's look at our production response. Comparing on the right, we have the eastern pad, so the right side as colors shows the background. The eastern pads, we have Middle Surfactant, Jomel, Lower Surfactant wells, offset by the western pads, MO, on the left side. The left chart of this slide, we also plotted the normalized rates of water and oil. Key observations are shallow zone wells maintained high water-oil ratios for an extended period due to the offset frac. Once the last pad was finished fracturing, as indicated by this vertical solid black lines, and we realized that if you see the oil rates that began to increase, water rates upper left began to decrease. So there's a clear demonstration that the fraction well and the producing wells are in communication. Lastly, through this study, we realized that frac sequence and pairing could significantly influence our fracture geometries during summer frac operations. Another thing is that if you increase the lateral distance, improves the well performance. Compress the timing, reduce the well stimulation efficiency. With that in mind, in our follow-up test, we continued with the 2 simul-frac crews and turned the Wolfcamp wells online first. As a result, we observed an improvement of early well performance in the shallow zones. Patience really is a virtue, even in shale. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention.
Good jokes too.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
It was on the, like you mentioned conductivity twice, like high conductivity and low conductivity. Is that an input in Whitson plus to use the fracture, the dimensionless fracture conductivity? Were you referring to that? Or were you meaning it more qualitatively in terms of the linear flow parameter?
Yes. Here to clarify, here is we use the linear flow parameter LFP A square root K. Here, this is a proxy of conductivity. Here. I know it's kind of after lunch. You give me a very tough task. So
I think it's a simple task.
before I step up, I said, well, to keep the audience awake, I have to keep myself awake.
That's awesome. Let's give him a big round of applause. Okay, good. For this next presentation, I don't know if a lot of you guys are hanging out with rock stars. I'm not saying that I am. But this guy is the only one that actually came with you know what a rider is? Like the list of goodies that they want before they present. But the way it works is like he has to present first, and then I need to bring it out what it is. So I'm not telling anyone what it is yet. Just, you know, it's kind of like a trade. And also pro tip for anyone I invite next year, they can bring riders. So with that, Jared, the stage is yours. I think he took your clicker that you will need. Appreciate that, boss.
Yeah, y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Hey, Jared Ryan at Expand, and what I'm going to be showing you guys an automated process to demonstrate one A root K linear flow parameter and initial reservoir pressure. I'm going to go through a couple of different exercises and show you like our process at Expand and why we like to do what we do and how we influence Whitson to incorporate our process. So we're all about efficiency. So automating things is thumbs up. So the first process that I did for this exercise was the regular auto fit on the classical RTA. So that's just going through your entire well list. And you can see what I'm highlighting: analytical RTA, classical RTA auto fit. And so this was done for 524 wells. I timed it and it took 17 minutes. Again, all about efficiency. So good job, Whitson team. Do I want to do that for every single well manually? No, because that would take me a lot longer than 17 minutes. So definitely like that. I will talk in detail about this PRI from square root of time plot later. I'm going to showcase that at a later date. So keep that in mind. So after doing exercise 1, the auto fit, the regular auto fit for the classical RTA, what we like to look at and expand is EUR compared to a root K per foot. Why do we do that? Because there's a trend. So I'm going to explain this plot: EUR versus a root K, and what we have is observed trend in black. And with all the data, we have the best fit of the red. But if I were to exclude everything that's highlighted, I will get the best friend of the black. So a good R squared, but the highlighted, I have a problem well set. So what's going on? Like, this was the auto push with Whitson, and just did auto generated, but some of them have like this problem bucket that I'm going to be calling it. And I want to focus on the red dot. I'm going to use that random red dot to dive deep into like one example to see like how can we fix this and make the total trend fit a lot better. So what did Whitson do on the mass auto fit? It's simply, where's the laser? This little auto fit. Click that button and it generates the best fit line through the plot. And I will use this as an opportunity to describe a little bit more about the Haynesville. This is a high pressure environment, high stress, 9% porosity, and we have, for reference, a pressure of approximately 10,500 psi. So zooming in on the LFP plot, observations. Observation 1, we have a good fit just from the auto fit. It's fitting the data. Observation 2, we have a y-intercept of 20 on this. So why is that? There's 2 primary reasons that we believe that we're going to get a y-intercept. 1 is skin, and 2 is our initial reservoir pressure is incorrect. So what do we know about our PI? We have a lot of data. It's mappable. It's predictable. We have DFIT data. So I would describe our mapping of our pressure in the Haynesville as high confidence. So that leads you to think, well, maybe it's skin. So we'll go a little bit deeper into that. In the Haynesville for modern wells, which this happens to be a modern well, into the observable trend, but obviously the fit is not good. So now the Goldilocks. We then met with Whitson. My colleague Chad and I were talking on the phone, and we're like, we got to get better at this. What we like to do is a process of locking the origin plus iterating on initial reservoir pressure to make sure that we get this 0-0 origin and a best fit line. So how can we do that with automation? So we took the advertised 2-minute lead time for Whitson and decided to send a quick email to Whitson support and be like, all right, timer. 3 minutes and 6 seconds later, we were on a Teams call. And we explained our problem, and then we generated this button. And what this button does, if you hover it, you estimate your initial reservoir pressure on the square root of time plot by varying it to the nearest 100 psi. And so that's going to vary your initial reservoir pressure until you get this data set into to fit all the data and go through the origin. So how did it do? We now have this good fit line, and from exercise 1, where it's over predicting a root K, exercise 2, under predicting a root K relative to EUR. Now we have the Goldilocks. It's fitting the trend. And what another observation is like, one, we don't have skin. Two, our initial reservoir pressure is actually 1700 PSI less. And you might be thinking like, wait a minute, you just told me you have high confidence in your pressure. Well, we do. At the same time, our pressure can be a moving target. This happens to be a child well and at depletion. So that makes sense. So after doing this exercise 3 in mass, how do we do? Our first trend where we have our problem bucket, you can see that everything shifted over to the left. And all this problem bucket happened to be children wells. We were able to get a observed trend of a 0.6 R squared to a 0.7. Note this is actually the same scale. I didn't do any PowerPoint magic there. And you can see all the highlighted wells, shifted over to the left. One additional observation I had was all these wells are to the right of the trend. Notice I labeled them as child wells. And also notice I'm using A root K versus EUR. A root K is a leading indicator of EUR. But what is really correlated is to OGIP. If we were to go look at all of these wells, since they are children wells, if I were to replot this against OGIP per foot rather than A root K per foot and incorporate the time to inlet and flow, I call it TELF on the shelf. I bet this would be a better trend. This is a hypothesis. I need to do that. That's what I have for you guys.
And just to also give some credit where credit is due, feature made by Sartek over there. It's in between Philip and Laban. Say hi. He's also the godfather of comparison plot, which I know a lot of people work with him there as well. So it was good to work with the team. It seems like there's a ton of questions. Oh no, there's actually just Anita behind all. Please, one question.
Hi, Alejandro from Chevron. Thank you so much for the presentation. Very good. So I couldn't catch if you are adjusting to the nearest 100. So basically any number rounded to 100 or just 100 PSI above and below to PI. And the reason for my question, so when I say PI is initial pressure, the reason for my question is because adjusting your initial pressure also has implication on the geomechanics, which has implication in your IC, which has implications in your net pressure on the fracture. So you might come up with a very good correlation, but the net pressure that you're assuming that's supposed to stay in the fracture is unphysical reasonable. So have you guys think about that as well?
Are you asking about the geomechanic effects with the pressure as well?
I guess that's only important if you are adjusting for more than 100 PSI. 100 PSI is not going to move your geomechanic model at all.
So to clarify, it's adjusting every 100 PSI to get that best fit to make sure it goes through the origin, since the assumption with this method is that you do not have skin.
Okay, and what is the maximum? Do you have any bound?
There's no maximum.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you. Just letting you know that might be a little bit risky for the other side.
For sure. It's by every single 100 PSI step. So just each one by 100 PSI.
Great presentation. Juan Fernandez, Oxy. I was curious about, you mentioned that you collect the defects. So were you guys also trying to collect defects on child wells just to compare and do some cross-validation with the approach that you're seeing here with defects that you're gathering in the field? I know defects can be tricky given their radius of investigation, et cetera, but I don't know if you have any comments on that.
We have not cross-checked that with defits with children wells, not intentionally at least. Since it is such a moving target, it's dependent on the cume, the spacing, etc. We have not dove into that as much. We actually have a little bit of confidence of utilizing this method to estimate our pressures. If we have like a big area that's off, using this methodology, we will influence our maps where we do not have defect data.
Well, if there's no other questions, Skittles for the one and only. Give a big applause.
So he asked me to do this, and I said, only if you give me Skittles. And not only Skittles, $100 worth of Skittles.
$100. Get a lot of Skittles for bucks. So we're in the bribe game, by the way. It seems like
it works.
Maybe there was one more question with the Skittles.
Just a quick question. Was the decrease in the initial reservoir pressure also seen like in your tubing wellhead pressure? Because 2000 PSI, I mean, you should see something like just a second for verification.
Yes, general observations is that we will see like the same amount of drop, frictional drop on our tubing casing pressure. This would be casing pressure, but yes, that is observed as well. It's not shown up 100% of the time. A lot of the child wells actually have a higher water rate, but more of the bottom hole pressure calculation.
Well, this is an interesting topic. 4 questions, record for today.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, Henry Jacot. Were these wells initially produced at constant rate for a period of time before they started declining?
No, not this well set. This is in a area where it's declining close to day one, probably within a week. Constant pressure, roughly about a week.
Okay, and in some of the Point Pleasant wells we've seen where we see a change in slope on the square root of time plot when they come off the constant rate.
Yeah. So
Thanks again.
one more comment. The backstory of Skittles.
Oh yeah.
So Matthias flew from the Netherlands,
Norway. Cool.
sorry, to meet us, and his first impression of me was meeting me in a meeting, and I knew it was going to be long, so I needed snacks. I had snacks in my front pocket, and they happened to be Skittles, little pocket Skittles, and I offered them to Matthias, and apparently that's weird and rememberable. So now Skittles.
Anyways, awesome. Appreciate it, boss. It was a good meeting. I had my colleague Sissel with me actually in Oklahoma a long time ago, and that was the time he was with Roan actually.
Yes,
so,
sir.
So there we go. Next presenter is she from Oxy. This is your clicker, and I'm going to get it out of the way.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. So I noticed that most of the talks are related with Whitson. I have to say that this one, because I developed many years ago, it was not related with Whitson, but I wish it will make my life so much easier. But never too late from today. I think like all of you, when you see my method, you might start to combine Whitson, the feature of RTA, and with this method to know your EUR from flowback data. So actually, I developed this for Eagle Ford in 2013 and never published. And then in 2018, I developed this for Permian, and we have been using it in Oxy for like 7 years. It's very nice to use it, especially for appraisal well. When we use the well online, we want to know the performance. So this one gives the early indication of the performance. And my co-author, Xinhua Liu and Courtney is here today. There, okay. And I have the well performance forecast background first, and then talk about the methodology, theory combined with the data analytics, actually. Then workflow and example, kind of show you an example how to do it, and then application example and summary. So even for unconventional, we almost, I think all of the companies still using the DCA, but it's good when you have enough data. So in general, we need 6 to 12 months data, actually better 12 months data for DCA. So I have not changed it. Material looks like this, no, doesn't change. So the second method is RTA. RTA has been widely used as well. I experienced the development of RTA started from 2010. Initially, we look at the actual time, and then linear superposition time. Finally, we go to the material balance time. I'm happy to see the growth of RTA technology and applications in the industry. And then there's some other method like power law, stretched exponential method by Tom Blessingame in Texas A&M, and then Dawn's method. But all these methods need over like 6 to 12 months data. And then in Oxy, we have our universal type curve developed by Vivek and other colleagues, also need 12 months data. And then I published this PNR method. I published 2 papers. The first one was for Hainesville in 2012. For Permian, I published 2 years ago, and then we have the webinar with Whitson recently. Those one also, even for the PNR, we need 3 months. And then can we predict EUR even earlier? Like later, I just start to work on some conceptual ideas, and then looks like when we combine with many data, it works. So I'm very happy to see that. So let's go back to the physics first. For unconventional, in the early time, we know that we have linear flow before the interaction of fractures. We have this flow equation. So we always go back to the fundamental to understand the physics better. So for the flow equation, the 2 main terms, one is the Jordan. The second one is this one in red. It combines all the reservoir properties and the AC square root K. And most people are very familiar with this AC square root K, but actual reservoir properties are also important, reservoir and fluid properties. And also there's time. Yeah, this red term. And AC is the fracture surface, and K is matrix perm, and then porosity here, total compressibility, and then fluid property of BO and mu. So this is for early production. So I look at the early production. Maybe we can use it applied to estimate 1 year Q. And then can we stretch it to EUR? EUR is long term. I know that there's a lot of assumption going there, but with a lot of well data, we can see if it works. So go back to the RTA first. How I have to say that this one I used Excel file to create the RTA plot. So that's because it's many years ago. Now we can use Whitson. It saved me a lot of time. So this is in Excel file, just the RTA material balance based superposition time plot. So you can see that this is just flowback data. It has hourly data. That's why we only have 26 days of flowback. We have like 600 data points. We can see that the slope is very straight, very nice. So from this slope M, if we invert this M, it includes all these parameters and the reservoir fluid and the fracture surface. And then if you adjust this by apply the drawdown, actually normalize drawdown because I don't want very big number. So normalize the drawdown, you can get this term, and which is the same as the flow equation. That's why we say, oh, this slope combined with, look, this doesn't work very well. This slope combined with the drawdown is totally related, exactly related with the flow equation. So we can say, oh, from this one, actually now I call this production potential because it's drawdown and then the reservoir fluid fracture, all this lumped together. And then can we predict this like 1 year Q or EUR? So we go to a lot of data to see. So first year Q first. Actually, this one related with what Gerald just mentioned in the last presentation. But of course, I look at 1 year Q first, and then I go to the EUR. So the 1 year Q, we can say here I have 214 wells because I developed this in 2018, so we don't have that many wells, but still over 200 wells. We can see that 1 year Q versus the production potential correlates very well. Actually, R squared is 0.8. And then we can have the uncertainty, low bound and high and upper bound. So in general, we can use the mid-case correlation to calculate the 1 year Q. Then I also look at the different benches, different area. So we have New Mexico, Texas, Delaware, Texas, Midland, and different benches. Like they all line up for 1 year Q prediction. This is because this slope includes all the reservoir properties and fluid properties. If you just look at one area, one bench, one PVT, then AC square root K is enough. But you look at all different reservoirs, you need to include all these properties. And then now it's a stretch to the EUR because 1 year Q, since the equation is early linear flow equation, so I expect it to work well. But for EUR, it's different story because it's stretched to 50 years. Based on the over 200 wells, it's amazing that still have good, reasonable correlation. Like here, the R squared is 0.66. There's some outlines. It's already better than I expected. So we call it, since it depends on the linear flow, so I call this linear flow EUR. And then we have the mid-case correlation here. And then there's low bound and upper bound. Now look at the different bench. Not like 1 year Q, look like all the bench, all the area, it's okay, use the same correlation, look all line up. For EUR, I find that it's relatively okay, but still like some bench are like slightly low, and actual majority of bench are okay. I did check that why this is different. Maybe look like this one has a high permeability. Those are the bone spring high permeability benches. But in general, if we don't know, we can still just still use the general one. We're happy with the correlation. They're good that unconventional, we have so many wells, so we can create correlation. I want to validate this by the simulation model. So I run some easy simulation model and then change all these parameters, from pressure to fluid property to porosity, total compressibility, and fracture surface and permeability. Of course, this is absolute permeability. Be careful, we have the relative permeability. Huh? So I find that even with the simulation, it's also line up quite well. And that's one outlier here. I I think it's because I do find that if permeability is very off from the very much higher than the permeability, it could be off. And then now let's go to the workflow to see how to use it. So it's very easy. So from flowback, you have rate, you have pressure, and then you just plot the RTA superposition time plot. And of course, you can use Whitson. This one also in 2018, because I found that we do have correlation. I don't want to do Excel file one by one. So I asked our database and surveillance engineer to create the spot file for flowback data to add this feature, RTA plot in our spot file database. So we can get this. And then when you have a slope, you plug into calculate the production potential. This is the initial reservoir pressure minus your abandonment pressure. Usually it's 1,000 psi in Permian, and then divided by the some reference pressure. For this correlation equation, this exact number, I use this reference pressure 4,500. That's because that's our mature development area in Permian. It has the initial pressure that, so I based on that one. Then you calculate the production potential 2.3. Then you plug into that correlation I shared earlier to get 1 year Q145 MBO. And then later, after 1 year, we saw this well has 143. It's amazingly close. I didn't expect so close. And then for the EUR, again, you can plug in that production potential to calculate the EUR 413 MBO, which is comparable to the 1 year DCA 344. Not so close, but I think it's close enough. And then next one, we can show the application. So the main application is for operation changes and then also some appraisal wells, actually. This example is for operation change because in 2018, that time we were testing aggressive flowback. We want to see if there's some impact. So the green one is aggressive, the red one is non-aggressive. So just look at IP30, aggressive one is 80% higher IP30. So how about the EUR? So just with this, actually this one has 40 days of product and flowback data. We use this methodology to get the estimation about 800. So two wells are similar. The well 2 is slightly better that time, 3% better. And then after 1 year, our reservoir engineer did the DCA. They got like 770, 870. So it's close. Of course, their well 2 shows better. Now 7.5 years passed already. Just early this week, I look at the number. I find, oh, okay, this well, they are Q, even the Q, this is Q. Q is almost the same, just 1% higher. So we are like really happy with the method. And then another application is for the appraisal well. That time we have 2 appraisal well. It's new area, new bench. So we just plug in this to check the 1 year Q and to predict the 1 year Q. Then after 1 year, I look at the 1 year Q. Looks like it's very close. And then after longer time, when I check the EUR, one well is on top of the, and another one is outline. Then I check the reason. Later I find that this appraisal well, it takes long time to clean the well, and then I just leave the flowback data. Looks like I didn't see the full potential yet. Okay, that's my summary. So I answered that question that flowback data is long enough to give some indication of well performance, and we can base on this hourly flowback. Now you have Whitson. I just check our Oxys database to Whitson. We do have the flowback data. I did check a few wells. Yeah, we can plot that RTA plot very clear, very easily. So you get that slope and calculate to get to the 1 year Q and EUR forecast. Sorry, I didn't change this. Long time ago, I called it pseudo EUR. Later changed the name to linear flow EUR. Okay, thank you.
Was this Delaware or Midland? Both places?
Yeah, all the wells, yeah, included both Delaware and Midland, and then different benches. Okay,
so no, you felt it worked kind of equally good both places?
Yeah, actually, there's a few wells even from Rockies.
Okay, from Rockies too?
Yeah, even from DJ.
Awesome. Any questions, Henry? Can we get a microphone for Henry? Yeah.
I thank you for a very nice presentation, because everyone wants to know sooner than later what the EURs. But the question I have is, did you compare the flowback slopes to maybe a longer period slope, maybe 6 months or a year, to see if there's much change?
It does change. Yeah.
They do change?
They do change, yeah.
And-
So that's why actually my experience, like when we plot that RTA plot, for the square root, I had to choose the data points lower than 7. 7 means maybe if you square it, maybe like 50 days. Yeah, better use 50 days data.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Good. And I know a lot of people in the audience use PNR-DCA. PNR-DCA, inventor.
Hi, thank you for presentation. Again, very good method. Quick question on your when you look at your original plot where you develop the correlation, the mid case versus the high and the low is about 50% difference higher and lower. So do you think that, obviously we're trying to do this with early data, but having 50% more or half of the EUR that you're coming in seems to be in the range?
I think it's 20 to 30% instead of 50. That's it.
So
1 year Q.
I eyeball like the 300 with the 6, and then it can go up to 400 and low to 200. Well, maybe I'm,
Yeah, so 30%.
Yeah, so something like-
I don't do say that.
So are
That's 20 to 30%. And then it's better now because all the time we only have 5K, the EUR is low, cum is low, but when you go to higher, it's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
That's why I also call the indicator. So we can put it in the big bucket, good bucket, normal bucket, poor bucket.
Need microphones.
Hi. Could you just show a figure with the determination of M, the little M of
This-
that data?
This M?
Right.
Yeah.
Old man can't read it, but the pressure normalized rate, which rate are we talking about in this flowback period? Is it oil rate, water rate?
Oil rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's only oil rate.
Only oil rate. That's a very good question. Actually, caught in my course, we tested both liquid rate and oil rate. Actually, liquid rate also work, but oil rate looks like better. And then our focus is on oil, so we just use oil rate.
Did you try total mass rate? Did you consider using total mass rate?
No,
'Cause you have
we didn't.
the-
Yeah, we didn't try that. We just tried just the volume rate, like total liquid rate or oil rate.
Because during the flowback period, that first month, you have the largest amount of water being produced.
Yeah, I agree. So that's why, like in early time, see this part we don't use. That has a lot of water, and then even maybe oil, oil start flow here. And then usually I find that from 2 to 2.5, actually 2 to 3 starting point, and then you can add and at around 7. So this is a good range. So early time, a lot of water, it does have some impact. That's very good point. Yeah, we did try. Just the math we didn't try.
Good. And everybody done, square root time plot and Whitson plus, so that when you get that check box many times on oil, it's typically got to clean up from water. So if you either toggle on total reservoir fluid or liquid rate, you can actually see the true kind of signal on those plots. But a big round of applause again. I'm going to get the next speaker up. Thank you so much. Thank you. The next presenter we have imported from Tulsa, and he is a wizard engineer and data engineer, data integration engineer. He has a lot of hats. He actually presented at whitCon 2 years ago, so he is one of those guys that return. If you do it 3 times, you get a jacket. 5 times, you get a clock, and it's gold. Anyways.
You've laid down the standard here. I like it. All right.
Not real gold.
Well, yeah, I was, Whitson let me not only back in the building, but back on their stage. I was surprised as anyone. This was a good quick title. I should have called it something like What I Learned or How I Overcame Snowflake Skepticism by Using It for What It's Actually Designed for. Quick throwback, as Dias mentioned, and to fully credit, this is his slide, but I was here in 23 where we talked about a method I proposed for inferring initial pressure by using kind of a regression approach that guessed and converged on the slopes through early flow data, the IPR slopes, and extrapolated those back to an initial pressure. And I like to brag on Whitson for this because I think they heard pretty shortly after from some other operators that did the same thing, and or other operators that wanted to do the same thing. And in very quick order turned it into a feature in the software, which is really cool. So high five to the dev team and Whitson generally. And I also hang on for dear life to the time that I did kind of a smart thing one time. All right. Today what I want to talk about is really a very straightforward topic. It's just about where your database lives and how you plug it into Whitson. There's good reason for Whitson users, for engineers or whoever else, geologists that do RTA, to care about this and to include it in the reservoir topics. There's a couple of reasons. Increasingly, I've seen these integrations being handled by the engineers, by the reservoir engineers, the users themselves, or somebody outside of IT. There's good reason for that. The specific nature of the integration, the way the data flows, the way the data is handled, and logical inferences about things like lift types and things like that require just a ton of input and really close guidance from the users. And so as a contractor or a W-2 employee, I've done this integration at several companies now and seen it done a variety of ways. All three of the major patterns for the integration: manual uploads and updates, and through the REST API. And most recently, working for Cord, I've done this for, as the title states, for actually it was about 4,500 wells using cloud-to-cloud integration with Snowflake. What else to say there? Yeah, so I guess for relevance, I know there are probably operators and users out there in the audience who are in one of these buckets or the other and kind of question whether they should be in a different one. So I think that hopefully I can fill in some color for those people questioning exactly what integration method is probably best for them. A robust data integration can offer us, all the benefits of technology generally, labor saving and insight that's not available otherwise. I think it seems, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, everybody has kind of come to converge on the agreement that RTA is most useful when its diagnostics are viewed in the context of doing RTA at scale. And so getting that reliable and go ready all the time can depend heavily on a sound integration. If you haven't undertaken the integration yet, if you're still in the manual world, which is, obviously where all of this kind of started at, you might wonder, exactly what you're setting about to do. And I always recommend that the major milestone is automated flowing bottom hole pressure. The heavy lifting, the routine work, sort of the drudgery work of moving data is all sort of on the uphill slope toward that automated flowing bottom hole pressure. Once you get that automated, everything on the other side of that is really just interpretation. It's analysis. And so your engineers get back to doing engineering things. The scope is things that we're all familiar with. One thing that I'll talk a little bit more about is that the QC and analysis phase is particularly critical as you scale, and you do this with really large numbers. I did want to say this example. This is an example of what we say PNR now, right? PNR versus time. And, another reason that these integrations are critical to be reliable is that if you're successful in your RTA efforts, a lot of times your managers, even your bosses, even some people in the C-suite will wind up wanting to see these charts. I've been in a situation where the COO wants to see this chart anytime of day or night on his phone. And so, a robust integration behind that is a big comfort. So Snowflake, just to talk comparatively real quick about the two major sort of automatable integration patterns, the REST API and Snowflake. Snowflake is a managed cloud-based data platform. It's got a support, or it's got a structure really purpose-driven around scalability, and shareability. So I make some notes there in the first column about things like native support for data sharing, for collaboration between organizations, and the other probably big advantage of having all of your data in this one platform is just the centralization effect. I'll come back to that a little bit more. REST API, if you're not familiar with REST, it's a standard. It's just a standardized way that we can communicate with data over the internet. And those data transactions take place over the internet, back and forth via the API. And I'll say that Whitson's API is really well ordered, really well documented. The two things, the cloud-to-cloud Snowflake versus REST API are just kind of designed around different purposes. This is a picture of sort of a cartoon picture of an integration using Snowflake. You've done this before, at least manually, so you're familiar with all the data sources along the left side there. And I guess one thing that I'll emphasize here, I'll kind of walk through it here. If you haven't done this before, then you might be trying to picture what the shared area looks like. And essentially, all you're doing in the cloud-to-cloud integration is that you're carving out a piece of your Snowflake subscription that is viewable, that's visible between the organizations. And so Whitson can get in and see what you've shared, and they can share back to that same area. Yeah, one thing I didn't really point out here, but as far as looking for the pointer here, yeah, as far as wellbore and lift configuration, you've probably spent a whole lot of time messing with that and trying to get that dialed in and working well. So I'll say, maybe the major selling point to me that I kind of tipped the balance for me was the fact that in a cloud-to-cloud integration like this, you just directly represent those tables. For us, it was WellView. You just directly represent those into the shared view, and Whitson on the back end picks that data up, and all of the logic that you would normally apply to try to infer your lift method, your flow paths, et cetera, that can be pretty heavy lifting as far as logical inference goes. That all gets handed off to Whitson. So yeah, and I've kind of condensed like everything Whitson does into one bubble. There's probably some engineers about to pass out seeing me do that, but the idea there is that this is kind of how it looks from the operator side. It really is that simple. You hand a lot of this data off, Whitson ingests it, and post analysis and everything there, it's all available to be shared back, and you can pipeline that out to your dashboards, your post diagnostic analysis. A lot of the stuff that's automatable that we've been talking about today becomes much easier if you have a nice, clean, centralized integration that looks like this. So some things that change with scale, I'll kind of move through this quickly. A couple of my slides are a bit overladen with text here, but the main thing is that some of these tasks that you're familiar with are pretty okay to do manually, like QCing the wellbore setup, the flowing bottom hole pressure estimates. As you scale to maybe hundreds of wells instead of a handful or a few dozen, you're very likely to wish that you had used at least the REST API and automated some of these things, so that instead of clicking through individual wells, you're looking at tables that you can very quickly search for outliers and anomalies and things like that. Yeah, cloud-to-cloud integration like Snowflake really starts to make itself look valuable at that scale. And then when you get to the thousands of wells level, that's where cloud-to-cloud really shines, because again, it's Snowflake includes not just the storage but also the compute, and so you don't have to worry about the compute overhead of big data transactions back and forth that enable you to sort of programmatically or on a tabular basis go through and try to QC how your analysis is running. Yeah, and this gets into some of the lessons that I learned from trying to do this at a much larger scale than I had in the past. I'm almost sure I stole this meme idea from somebody, and I don't remember who it was, but yeah, it's whoever it was. I thank you, and I'm sorry. But you're familiar with some of these data-centric challenges that you face in any integration. This is the case still, whether you're using Snowflake or the API or anything else. I probably highlight the UWI misalignment one most often because everybody's fought that. If you haven't, it's probably your first day in the industry. So those things are all still there with Snowflake, but I guess the advantage that I like to illustrate is that everything is centralized now. The search space, the way you drill through the data, the way you analyze it and try to identify what the problems are, and the solutions that you implement are all in the same place. And as soon as you're done with them, Whitson can see them. There's no calling on them and having them re-pull anything over. There's no re-uploads, re-downloads. Everything is nice and clean and central. And I'll let you process GRU and see if you relate. If you've done one of these integrations, you know that the early part of the rollout probably consists of some shocking findings. Entire groups of wells are missing. Things aren't running, things are breaking, there's warnings everywhere. And I know when I've written the code to do this with the API, I've thought, okay, I did something majorly wrong here where, it's going to go very badly for me. And then you find out, oh no, it's just that, some of the wells don't have identifiers, or there's a letter in the middle of these APIs or something like that. Again, that's the same kind of challenges you face with any integration, but and you can expect to still face that when you get Snowflake in the mix. But I guess one thing that I've taken away from this scale of an integration is that the bigger your integration, and especially the more you try to squeeze out of the integration in terms of robustness, the more you cast a light on data quality. So When I do this now and going forward, I put a lot of emphasis, and I recommend that you do, on the resolution strategy. Because the last thing you want to do is get in there and find that you have a bunch of broken data that prevents you from doing analysis, and then you've got users out here manually uploading and downloading their wells anyway. So yeah, the fix to that is, to me, is really just to see it coming, prepare your organization, your stakeholder group for it, and especially to try to get somebody in the org that can take ownership of all of those data sources and make a plan about what you're going to do about broken data, because it is going to come up, and it's going to be a struggle. It's endemic to the nature of our data. Yeah, so coming around to conclusions, this is kind of illustrates one little bit more concrete example of how a strong integration can allow you to do certain analysis. I really just picked this one because it's so widely recognized. It's such an industry standard. I'm a big fan of statistical modeling with RTA diagnostics, and maybe I can tee that up as a future whitCon topic. There's a lot we can do there, and I think actually we can do a lot better than what I'm showing you, but yeah, that's probably for another time. This one, the reason that I think it's relevant is because everybody knows it, and it definitely depends on your sample count. So I know you've all been through this struggle where you're looking at a particular well area, you're filtering down to wells that were steered in a particular bench and co-developed in a particular way, completion types and volumes, and you get to the end of it and you've got 5 wells. Yeah, what can you learn from 5 wells, statistically speaking? If somebody's asking you to characterize uncertainty, it's a real challenge. So yeah, a robust integration behind all of these analyses, all of these post-diagnostic analyses, can enable you to learn a lot more and really maximize your value. Yeah, so coming around to conclusions, really, I think, I guess I'll say years ago, I was pretty skeptical about Snowflake. I don't like to buy things. I don't like to pay for things. I like to just write my own. I always say that. If you know me, you've heard me say it. We can roll our own. We can do it ourselves. But yeah, in this case, it would be hard or nearly impossible to duplicate. And I think the thing that really changed about my perspective on it is I knew that the value was out there for large amounts of data, like huge data transactions. But having done this now, I think even as a smaller organization or a smaller team, I would still consider a cloud-to-cloud integration like Snowflake, because you want your engineers doing engineering things, right? Fundamentally, I think it's a great advantage for that. And also, most companies out, not all, but most companies out there are operating with growth in mind, with big growth in mind. And it's easy to get on the wrong side of the resources that you've selected. And suddenly you've landed a big acquisition, and the last thing you want is for the analysis, the completion and spacing planning to be slowed down because you're in the middle of a lift and shift to a system that more accommodates your new scale. That's it. Thank you.
Due to time, we have one question.
I thought I got us back on.
This is going to be the He Is Team API, by the way. We support everyone.
Thanks, Station.
We don't discriminate.
Thanks for the presentation there, Sam. The question is more related to your lessons learned. With the integration, did you see something that you guys are adapting to how the data was before and then change it to structure it more, and then, or like, sorry, step back for the question.
Yeah.
Did you guys adapt the new structure now, or do you still use some of the data integration from the past, from the format and all those issues that comes for the holy grail of integrating data?
What I encourage people to do is to default to the Snowflake integration project and to do what you can there. Yeah, the reality is new data comes in all the time. Core just announced a new acquisition recently. And man, when you try to mesh together these data sets, sometimes they're coming from different data systems that are maybe not so compatible, or maybe the data is just not available yet. Yeah, so when that's the case, the reality is the API is still super handy for custom transactions like that, and the manual upload and download and updates are great too. So yeah, you want to retain the adaptability. You want to retain the in-house sort of knowledge and habits to be able to work around any kind of blockade in your cloud integration. But
Tyna. He actually worked with Graham in the early days of his career, so we need to get those stories at the happy hour.
My name is Brett Whitson. I'm a reservoir development engineer with Tyne Energy. Today's chat is going to be a little more academic or conceptual in nature compared to some pragmatic stuff we've seen already, titled the increasing GOR ratio as we produce our wells while we're still above the bubble point. So we've seen this in a number of our wells. So I'm just going to run through the charts quickly here. The red is the GOR. The red dot on the far left side is the initial GOR. Green is the oil rate. Bold black is bottom hole pressure. And then the black dot is where we go through the bubble point. So you can see early time. There we go. So early time before the bubble point, increasing GOR. We see this in a number of our wells. It's not just this group of 4. We see it in offset wells where we have been drawing them down relatively aggressively. So the EOS model validated by PBT, we're not worried about that. That has come out to be a non-issue. The surface to bottom hole correlation, bang on, confirmed with gauge data. I don't think at this point in the volatile oil window that desorption can handle as much as gas as what we're seeing. I think in some of these wells, we're seeing almost 100% increase of GOR in that early time. So root cause, I think what's happening here, so we've got an early time gas liberation as we go from a confined, super tight environment. That gas is flashing off as we reach the frac phase. And then 2, there's also a velocity or a rate component to this. And that's the last point we'll cover. As the fluid velocity increases going through the pore throats, we actually see a pressure drop. And that pressure drop is potentially dropping us below the saturation pressure. So moving on. So I heard the question, where's Canada? Where's the Duvernay? So we start way down south here. Hop in your airplane. You need a passport. Canada's still a separate country. 4-hour flight north to Calgary. Get into your rental heavy Chevy. Fill up with a tank of diesel. Head another 4 hours north. Drayton Valley, right where Tyne assets are. So bigger view, entire Duvernay Basin, and then our land base. So we don't have that many bodies in the ground at this point. I think our producing well count's about 23. So very much in the delineation phase. We are smack dab between Kaybob up here, very densely populated, Willie Green down here, also very densely populated. We're in somewhat uncharted territory, so we're trying to get this right as we step into it and make sure we're drawing and developing our wells appropriately. Quick background, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. The main thing I just want to focus on is permeability and the gross pay. So we're about 20 meters in American, that's about 65 feet. Super tight, 200 nanodarcies. And then you can see we progress quite rapidly from black oil to RGC. And we're very much right now our development is around this critical phase. These wells are confirmed by PBT as volatile oil. I think that's all I need to say about that. Just again, directional data. Our landing zone, like I said, pretty tight. So that's the full Duvernay package. We land just above this, the mid-carb. It's actually pretty solid drilling, so no real issues there. Rate and production, as I was nattering on about earlier, you can see the same thing here, the GOR increasing before we reach the saturation point. So that's tied to the production here. You can see the gauge and the bottom hole calculation. And then how we know we're going through the bubble point is where we get the separation from tubing and casing pressure. That signature is classic in quite a number of our wells. Going to start getting into some of the meat and potatoes here on why we think that's happening. So I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, claim to be an subject matter expert at this level of reservoir engineering. So actually, I'm kind of being a bit greedy here and hoping to leverage on some of the horsepower in this room to say, okay, either kick me off hook, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, or at least get us going down. Is this something that other operators have seen? I don't recall seeing it when I was working in Eagle Ford, but Eagle Ford's much thicker with almost an order of magnitude more permeability. So from the pore confinement side of things, these are super tight nanometer level pores. So we no longer, when you're thinking of production, the analogy that I can think of is I know Matthias and his Scandinavian background. I'm sure he's been in some of these big open air Scandinavian death metal mosh pits. Lots of people around. All you're interacting with is the guy right next to you. Versus when Graham was in Turkey, I'm sure he was in some seedy Euro dance club. Everybody's small, tight walls. Those are the two ends of the spectrum here. But what ends up happening in the unconventional world is at these scales, the capillary forces, absorption, wall interaction, they all change what we accept as classic bulk level PVT. And what happens is we start suppressing the saturation pressure as pore diameter decreases. And then that affects how we draw down the well and when we actually go through the bubble point, depending where you are in your flow path. So capillary pressure also fundamentally tied to that, to the pore size, to the pore confinement. We're also working to potentially suppress the saturation pressure. We are single phase oil where we are in the reservoir in this, initial reservoir conditions. So for capillary pressure to be high, you actually need to you need that phase separation. So this is one area where I'm still trying to read more papers and try and figure out exactly what's happening on there. So happy to have thoughts on that from. So PVT, this is the actual PVT diagram here is out of Whitson. Like I said, it's matched to core lab data. So we know we do know that's what's happening on the bulk standpoint. But in the unconventional world, this is being suppressed. And like I said, whether it's from the pore confinement, suppressing that, the root cause is what I'm still eluding me a little bit. But as we start looking through the drawdown, as we go from initial pore position, far field, we're drawing this down through what we would think as the classic bulk phase. And number two, so here we're going from far field to the fracture, the matrix fracture interface, and then from 3, we're actually into the fracture. So I had to separate this a little bit here, but assuming this does remain isothermal, these would be stacked on top of each other. So this is just purely cartoon action here, not physical. And then we go from there down to the frac, to the wellbore, and to the surface. So what we're seeing is you actually get this pressure increase when you move out from the confined pores and into the fracture. And that loss of support is what I think is potentially causing this flash gas. One of the things that we've noticed is this is also very rate dependent. We didn't want to go through full Navier-Stokes here, so we just simplified it down in our assumptions here. We're going to start off with a quick and simple derivation. So we start off with Newton second, sprinkle in a bit of math, a few simplifying assumptions. Oh, and behold, we get down to the Bernoulli equation. We can get rid of the gravity term, and gravity within the pore throats negligible, sorry. We're left with these two terms so we get a static and then a kinetic term that equals our total pressure. So classic Venturi diagram here. So what I was trying to show is within the leading edge, this would be like our pore storage. As you move across the Venturi, you're getting into the pore throat. So that would be our permeability. And then the pressure drop when you're coming out the other side, effectively being either the next pore throat, or if you want to take that thought one step further, into the fracture network itself. So as we go through, you're going to get your velocity increase through those pore throats, the corresponding pressure drop, and that's what I was alluding to earlier. Is that pressure drop enough to drop us below saturation pressure? The issues with the gas bubbling out is we're now left with a more viscous, deadened oil. And we're basically relying on solution gas drive here, get from the matrix into the frac. But as we increase our viscosity, decrease our permeability, we're potentially inhibiting flow. So is this reservoir damage? Is this reversible? Is this just something that's specific to our area code? Like I said, I didn't see it when I was working in Eagleford, but we've seen similar production signatures in other areas of the Duvernay. And now tying all these kind of separate thoughts into one plot here. So if we think about 3 separate drawdown strategies, so we go back to Bernoulli here for a second and recall the static term and the kinetic term. So that's what we're plotting here. Okay? The pressure profile on the kinetic term, the pressure profile on the static term, and then a total pressure. Okay. On the far left, we've got the matrix. we've got our matrix fracture interface, and then our SRV, and then a corresponding pressure profile with each of these. So I've assumed we've got our bulk saturation pressure in the far field, and then within the matrix, the so-called confined saturation pressure. So as we're starting, so the orange line here is potentially what ties to this schematic here. And then the same thing with a numbering that I've got here. I have got the same numbering along the bottom here. So our static term, as we're dropping through from the initial conditions down, we get a pressure drop. Our kinetic term, the velocity is increasing. And we can see this is, in this scenario here, we're still above the confined saturation pressure. But once we start getting into this, into the so-called matrix fracture interface, we start seeing, okay, we're gonna start to see bubble gas nucleation in this area here. And then outside into the frac, we're potentially back above saturation pressure. The extreme drawdown case pulls us below saturation within the matrix. That's gonna tie potentially to this here, where we're now forcing the gas out within the matrix. This is probably the more critical one from a flow standpoint. Once we're into the fracture, we've now seen orders of magnitude increase in permeability. That confinement, like that the flow, the delta P from here to here is going to be much higher than it is from here all the way out, just based on the permeability and the SRV that we've created. I think that's all I needed to go through there. So back to one of the other comments at the beginning, absorption. Again, in the volatile oil window, I don't think desorption would contribute enough gas to the magnitude that we've seen. And the other thing too, like we see the Langmuir, that's what's commercially available, but that is a far simplified model. The BET would be a much more representative model, so heterogeneous, multi-layer, but again, nothing commercially available to model that or incorporate it into simulation. Whether or not this is relevant, if somebody's got something different, I'd love to hear it. And then just into the last couple of comments here. So early time production, we've seen it going up, increasing the GOR, increasing above GORI, while we're still above saturation pressure, attributed to poor confinement, capillary pressure, and then that sudden loss of confinement is allowing the gas to nucleate out. And how much of that is in the matrix from the velocity component, how much of it is PVT related when we're going from matrix into fracture. Again, there's no way for us to actually measure that. But what we have seen is when we stop getting quite so rammy on the production, you can see early time, very aggressive drawdown, later time, we've recovered that. We've shown to be a more proficient or more efficient development. So I think that's all I got. Oh, so yeah, that's the last one there. Once this gas is out, there's no getting it back. There's no putting that genie back in the model. The miscibility pressure in the Duvernay is far above initial reservoir pressure. So the two components for reentrainment and that is time and pressure. And well, we don't have either of those. So once it's gone, it's gone. That's why we want to be sure that we're getting it right the first time. And as we develop our drawdown strategies, that we're trying to maintain above the bubble point for as long as possible. So theoretically, if the bubble point has been suppressed by the unconventional, like the poor confinement, et cetera, we should have more working headroom. We should have more time to draw these wells down in the single phase without dropping without the gas liberating in the reservoir itself. Yeah, so just on a PNR DCA, there was about a 35% increase between those two drawdown strategies. So that is about all I have to say on that. So
beautiful.
Okay, yeah.
One question.
I wanted lots of feedback.
Fulford, he's a PhD master's student guy.
I got it.
He loves equations.
Oh, do I go stand over there?
I like the presentation because it's a bit of a thought puzzle. The one thing you didn't consider in these slides, at least, was in situ fractionation. And so that's actually a empirically documented effect. There was some research from Texas A&M, REPC. They actually measured the composition of a well over time. And they saw fractionation, meaning methane composition, increasing over time. What's really cool about that is you could see the methane concentration drop as an indication of flow regime change, where you started to get maybe inflow, like compound linear flow, whatever you want to call it, at later time. But I don't know if it contributes to the magnitude you're seeing, but it is a real effect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to do one more.
So that was really cool. How do you know that it's not just Like a holdup effect of the oil and changing fluid rheology in the vertical section.
As in the gas coming out of solution within the wellbore itself?
Yeah, so the gas has essentially like a different slip velocity, and it's just moving faster than what the oil is, and it's a function of drawdown. And that's also changing the fluid rheological properties as it's doing it. So you would see the same effect. What about if we measured the C1, C2 ratio?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Raymond, any thoughts on that? Sorry, Raymond Honsack, my colleague, reservoir engineer.
Yeah.
Like we are tracking the composition of the fluid, and no matter of the drawdown strategy, they have a fairly consistent way of lightening as we produce the fluid.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't see it in here, but you are tracking C1, C2
We are.
ratio.
And,
okay.
And so there's wells that will follow that population average if I draw them down very hard.
Yeah.
And I have this excessive gas production to the tune of up to 250%.
Yeah.
Or I draw a well down very gently, they will still fall on that same average compositional change. So I don't think that is the driving factor, but I think that's definitely.
And so today we'll be discussing modeling SRV degradation using a custom table for fracture gamma. So I just want to give you some background of the area that I work, and that's the Louisiana Haynesville-Bossier Shale. We have a reservoir fluid. It's a dry gas for you that are unaware. The porosity ranges from 5 to 9% on the effective porosity. V-clay ranges pretty wide range from 25 to 55%. And the pressure gradient also ranges pretty widely, although overpressured ranges from 0.75 to 0.95. Keep those in mind. We're going to need that a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so now for some historical context. Historically, when we've tried to use simple numerical models to model Haynesville or Bossier wells, we've really struggled to do so. And if you look at the image on the right-hand side, but the left image, kind of shows you if you're matching on the gas rate, and kind of look at that brown line, the pressure where the red circle is, we can get a match for a good period of time. However, where that red circle is, you can see that the model suggests that we shouldn't need the amount of drawdown that we're actually taking to get that rate. So we're losing productivity relative to what the model would predict. So what we would do is we would have some band-aid approaches where we would add perhaps a skin in or a refrac with a negative XF, and we would try to put a Band-Aid on it. And we can get a match, and on the right-hand side, you can see that match. The problem is we can't apply that to other wells. So we couldn't have something that was predictive that we could apply to other wells. And so where we went from there is we did have some success using some more advanced numerical models. We were able to gather some data, some time-lapse interference testing. It was great. We loved it. And what we learned from that there was 3 main damage mechanisms that we were characterizing in our play. The first is pressure-dependent perm, which is pore compaction. So that's going to be within the matrix. The other 2 are in the fracture, which would be embedment and crushing. It was at this time we started talking with Whitson and discussing like, hey, we have these challenges with simple numerical models. What options do we have available? And so the team brought up like, hey, we have a feature within Whitson that we can use, and that's the fracture gamma. And so when we think about the characterization of what's happening within the fracture, there's a cartoon on the right-hand side, just showing you the improper embedment, from a cartoon perspective, what that looks like. And then also, Jared mentioned earlier about the Haynesville Shale. We see some pretty large stresses in the Haynesville, and therefore crushing could be something that's in play. And so with those, we need to make sure we include that. The problem is that these aren't necessarily happening right as you turn the well online. And so while the fracture gamma looks great, having a single fracture gamma that describes the performance we're seeing was just not a realistic option for us. And so we asked Whitson and said, hey, can you guys help us out? We need we need more granularity. We need to have additional features. And they said, well, let's add a custom table. And so this allows us to add in the damage as we observe it. And so what we're looking for is the K, so the permeability at some pressure. It's going to be less than that permeability at the initial pressure. And so we're trying to understand what is that connection. To look at that on the top right-hand side, you can see you can go to the well and reservoir data, click on the details. And then if you're using the custom table, you'll see it at the very bottom. It'll say custom table under the fracture. And if you don't have that yet, you can, at the very top where there's the green check mark, you can click the gamma button, go over to fracture, and then you can insert a custom table there. When you'll need this is, like I mentioned, when the fracture gamma is 0 to start with, or perhaps when it's not a constant gamma. And so our approach with this is we want to, first, can we get a match at all? Like, we're struggling here. And so can we get a match at all? And then if we can do it once, can I do it on a representative well set? And that's really been where we've lacked. And then finally, if we can do that, can we then use the models across the field? Okay, so thinking about how we apply this, and my goal for this slide is that you can take this and then be able to apply it for your reservoir. So hopefully that comes across. If it doesn't, find me later and let's figure out a way to get you to where we're at right now. So the step one that we have is we want to get a match on the first well. And so we'll use a well control of gas. Why do we do that? Well, if you look at the top right again, you can see where when we're matching on the gas, it allows you to see at what pressure we're starting to see this mismatch between the model and reality. And so what we can do at that point is create a fracture gamma segment at that pressure. And this is going to be a very iterative process where you have to figure out, okay, what's the magnitude of that gamma and when does that start? And then once you do that, you're going to find that, yes, that's great, but then it doesn't capture late time data. So I may have to add another segment as well. Now, as you're going through this, you're going to find that this is a non-unique solution. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. It's like, okay, well, how does this help me? Well, we do that by going to step 2, which is going to another well. So we can take that same custom table that we applied from well number 1, apply it on well number 2. If you get a good match, great. Probably not, right? You're probably not going to. And what you'll do is then iterate on that well. Okay, why is this one not working? What do I have to change to get that to work? And then go back to step 1, iterate through the process again, where I have one set of pressure-dependent perm, fracture gamma to get a successful history match. And then as you then go to step 3, which is well number 3, generally at this point, you have something that's pretty close and you're having some minor tweaks at this point. At least that's what we observed. Okay, so on the bottom right-hand side, this is an application of kind of what it looks like for us. 3 of the 4 look very similar to this, where we had no gamma to start with, and then at some pressure, we had to add in some damage of some magnitude, and then we would then change that magnitude later on. So we modeled it with 3 segments, but we set up an Excel spreadsheet to be able to handle 4. And so on the bottom left-hand side, we would just fill out the little table at the very top left. It would fill out, basically create that custom table for us, and we would copy the yellow and paste it into Whitson. And then just something that was interesting to us was just looking at the K over the KI, just to look at the magnitude at each of the pressure shifts, or the pressure segments. And you could see what the K over KI is at that point, which is pretty helpful. A few tricks here. We did use Excel to generate this. I would recommend that. If you guys find it successful, it could be something we work with Whitson on to maybe include within the software. One thing that we do assume is that the K over Ki, as your pressure depletes, that it never increases again. So it's either going to stay the same or continue to decrease as you have a larger delta P applied. We do apply the switch points based on delta P. So it's not based on an absolute pressure. It's not 5,000 PSI. We have a switch point. It's going to be a delta P from your initial pressure. And then finally, something that we noted, and I'd be interested to hear from others in attendance, is what you guys might see is that we required a much higher gamma than what we used for the matrix. So in some cases, an order of magnitude higher. Okay, so let's test it out. How do we do? So on the left-hand side, you can see what our history matches have looked like historically. It's so frustrating. For a year we look good, and then after a year we just lose that productivity and we cannot get a match. Using the custom fracture gamma though, however, it's a fantastic fit. I remember first showing Matthias, I was asking him a question and he saw this history match and he's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I think he used another word, but I'm like, I know, right? And so it's very, very exciting. What we do see is that, it looks, I'm showing it on a time scale, but the way we think about it, again, it's based on pressure, not time. And that what we generally see is that a single fracture gamma is not sufficient to capture the effects that we're seeing here. And in this particular example, we had an increase in gamma, meaning that we didn't have one at first, then we started with a certain gamma and then had to increase it later. In all of these scenarios, we're still assuming that there's a matrix gamma as well, meaning that the pressure dependent perm in the matrix, we're holding that constant. Okay, so my wife tells me that I don't do a very good job with feelings and I don't show my emotions. And so I wanted to just put it out here for you guys. I'm being very vulnerable and I hope you'll understand where I'm coming from. So external, maybe there's not a lot of emotion, but inside, man, I was so excited. This is fantastic. And so really exciting, you know, you're like, man, I can't do this. And then finally we can do it. And it's like, awesome. But I had to back up a second. It's just one well, Chad. We have to do additional wells. So can we do it again? Looking at well number 2, you are seeing the final result of that, and you can see the answer is yes, we were absolutely able to do so. But it wasn't this easy, right? This is multiple iterations that we're going through to get to this point. But it was interesting, and by the way, these are not cherry picked. Like these are, we were able to consistently get these results, which was very encouraging. Okay, so kind of the rules that we had as a consistent custom gamma table had to be used across the board within a particular area in a formation. And then also, we would allow adjustments for PI. So we, you know, as PI is the initial pressure is changing within an area, we did allow that to change. Again, very important. We're still assuming a constant matrix gamma, so we're including that matrix damage as well. And then one thing we did do is use a consistent methodology to kind of get to the point where we're using the gamma. So what I mean by that is going through our RTA and then go through the numerical RTA and then using that as the inputs for the numerical model. And so essentially what we're doing is we're iterating on fracture, half-length, XF, and permeability were the large knobs that were turned. So I didn't necessarily know that this was going to be something we'd be able to do, but it worked out. So I wanted to share it with you guys. And so when we're looking at just the characteristics of what we were seeing, I wanted to see, like, when we look at the different areas, what are we seeing? And so there were 3 different categories that stood out to me. And one was, when do we see that damage start, that damage initiation? And so if you look on the plot, you see that damage initiation point. When does that start? Does it start right away? Does it start after a certain amount of delta P? And what we found was for area 1, for formation A, we saw it immediately, but that wasn't the case for all of them. So area 2, 3, and 4, we saw it at some higher pressure, with area 3 being the highest. The second thing we were looking at is the magnitude of the gamma. And so the way I think about this is if you get a history match and then you turn it off, you see the greatest change in performance prediction between the two. And so what we found was that when the magnitude was where it was the lowest was in area 1, so damage starts quickly, but it's the magnitude of that damage is less. Went to area 2 where it was medium, and then the highest in area 3 and 4. And then finally, the last thing is progression trend. So if you look at the plot again, you can see that the slope is changing with the green, where you're not seeing as much incremental damage as the pressure continues to decline, whereas you have the orange, where it's what we would call like an increasing progression trend, meaning that the damage is getting worse as you deplete the reservoir. And what was interesting is that we did see some correlations between this and some of the other geo and pressure properties. And that was that I mentioned earlier, the clay volumes that we see, the pretty wide ranges of clay. As we saw more clay, then we saw earlier damage initiation. And then also as we saw increased pressure or pressure gradient, we had a greater magnitude of damage. So with that, as we look forward to future work, we did a small subset here. What I'd love to do is apply to obviously a larger subset of wells. And then it brings up a lot of questions of how does this change when we think about completion design? Is this something we can impact? And part of me wants the answer to be no, because then it'll be easy to apply this across the whole field. But part of me wants it to be yes, because I want to solve the problem, right? And then also spacing, drawdown, depletion. So how does this change? That's to be investigated. So this brings up some questions. Maybe the most important question is, would it be right to have a Whitson presentation without some emojis? And I think the answer is no, it would not be right. And so I have some questions. I would love to take questions from the audience, but also I have some questions for you. We'd love to hear if you have alternatives of how we could be thinking about this differently. Are there other levers that we should consider pulling? And then also from the vast amount of experience we have here, would love to know if you have similar damage in your reservoir and have you used simple models to analyze these. And then lastly, just a big thank you to the Whitson crew and then also to Expand Energy for allowing me to be here. And then I do want to recognize the team that I'm a part of. We have a fantastic team, love them, and glad to represent them today.
I have one over here, Daniel. This is going to be a hard one.
Hey, Chad, this is Diego from Rockcliffe Energy. Great presentation. I've seen the same. And I've been so frustrated with RTA because with no matter the software, you cannot get a match exactly what you're describing. Super interesting. Expand is privilege because you guys have more wells than anyone in the Haynesville. But I mean, I'm curious how much you think the shape of the gamma custom table with time is universal, because you mentioned about areas and you mentioned about formation, Middle Bossier, Haynesville. How far you think you can extrapolate one table and when you think you got to switch? And I know this is still under investigation, but you probably are in the best position to answer that given the data access you have.
Yeah, so what we do see is that, and so first off, I did 13 wells over the thousands of wells that we have, right? So it's not a huge sample set, but they were representative samples where I tried to find double bounded wells that I thought were in similar rock. And so we tried to be very particular about which wells were selected. But we definitely did see differences as you go through the different areas. So I would say we have 3 different areas and 2 different formations, and you definitely see differences as you go from one to the other. And so like how far can you go? I don't know, but we definitely see, like I went far enough apart where I knew the geo properties were changing pretty drastically. So I think it's probably going to be driven by those geo properties, also the pressure gradient or pressure. I think those are going to be the large drivers. And so to the extent that you have similar properties on those, I think you could apply it.
Did you take into account like any operational issues that were happening that were correlative to changing gamma? And then the other one is for the larger subset of wells, you plan to do a look back on all the wells that you have done to see the trends of how gamma changes over time, and you want to automate that?
Yeah, so we did specifically target wells that had uncomplicated well histories. And so there were no operational challenges in the wells that we had, at least nothing material. And then, sorry, what was the second question?
Auto flip a custom table?
Can we get a thumbs up from
I think that's a feature request. It's a feature box over there.
Yeah, I mean, I would love, if there is interest, if there's other reservoirs that were experiencing this and that's something we could apply, I think it would absolutely make sense. So, I mean, that's something that we can definitely work on with Whitson. Would love to do so.
Actually, you seem like you have kind of this Excel interface thing.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Kurt?
When you looked at this, do you think it makes more sense to, going back, you're talking about the relationship to like geoproperties like clay. So that's mappable. Do you think it makes more sense to kind of think of type areas as a way to do this? Or do you think maybe it makes more sense to think about the continuous change in those properties and how pressure clay is affecting it, and it's more of a continuous trend that's varying across a field?
Yeah, I mean, I think we lean towards simple answers. And so like grouping it where we already have similar geological parameters lumped together, so our different type well areas, that seems like a natural place to start. If it is gradational, perhaps there's some other ways we can look at it, but I feel like that's absolutely a great place to start, and that's what I would recommend.
Thank you for the presentation. Juan Fernandez with Oxy. So I know very little about the basin and specifics, but thinking about condensate banking or something that's happening downhole that could be manifesting itself as a pressure dependent permeability reduction or something else happening in the near wellbore, and also thinking about your drawdown strategy. Maybe these wells have an uneventful drawdown strategy, but maybe the drawdown strategy is also sort of influencing what you're seeing in the data. So curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is dry gas, so that's the condensate baking. It's not necessarily going to come into it, but we do, to your point though, like we do have some lab data that suggests that we are seeing embedment. So like we didn't make those up. We have lab data that supports the pressure dependent perm. It's a well-documented thing within the Haynesville. And so I feel like we have the right knobs, and then you could argue whether we've got the right allocation to each individual knob. So for instance, if I change my matrix gamma, can I still get a history match? And the answer is yes. And so there's still going to be some non-uniqueness. But anyway, I think we kind of have ranges of the properties of each of those parameters, and we're trying to stay with kind of within those has been our approach.
Beautiful. I think that we need to take another round of applause.
Yeah, sorry for that.
We'll take a 20-minute break now. There's snacks and drinks and coffee, and there's one session after that, and then it's happy hour and flight club and the rest of it. And solid. Curtis Whitson. We need Curtis Whitson to the reception. We need Curtis Whitson to the reception. And can Mo come to the reception? Can Mo to reception, please. Mo to reception. Pick the best part of the conference. Okay, everyone. We are going to get started again. If people are online, we apologize. We're a little late because people love to socialize in person. whitCon 2025. where people meet belly to belly. Here, I think I need some help from my Whitson folks. Can some of the Whitson folks help to get people in? This is a lost cause. Okie dokie. We are going to get started again. Sanita, can you get those folks in? Ready to rumble? Clicker works. Okie dokie. If my Whitson colleague to try to get people in, close the doors to signalize that something is happening. My friend Hamid, now it's literally just like it's one session where it ends with an award ceremony for the Fetkovich Technology Award. And before that, there's actually 3 community awards, but they're going to be quick. But before that, we're going to learn a few things. Matt, can you try to text our friend Tyler Connor?
That's a lost cause.
I'll give that to Caitlin. Looks Martin. Looks like we're getting okie dokie.
Enough of this guy already.
Mo, can you help getting people in? I guess we can't close the doors, but let them out, so that wouldn't be fair. Have to join online. Can someone close the door on the side there? Just that door. Thanks, Eric. And I think we're ready to get started. So the last session is related to well spacing, completion, depletion. That's the whole topic. Where are we going to place the wells, and how are we going to do it the most kind of economically optimal the next 30, 40 years? That's our job for as long as I'm in the industry. Maybe I'll retire then when I'm 70. Who knows? Braden, take it away.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all. I'll be talking today about well spacing, which is near and dear to my heart. So why do we focus on well spacing? Well, as all of you who work through DSUs know, you're probably going to end up with something on the right-hand side here. You're going to be looking at wells per section versus NPV, and getting that answer right is probably one of the most important recommendations we make as reservoir engineers. So if we know that this is where we're heading, some form of wells per section versus an economic metric, the analysis is only going to be as good as our spacing metric to begin with. So we want to put a lot of engineering time and focus on how we quantify well spacing. So well spacing is easy, right? Well, as you can see from this lease in the Permian, there's a lot of different things going on for spacing. So are you looking at the distance between wells in a certain formation? Well, you have formations that are pretty close to you. That's going to lead you astray there. You're also going to have some pretty big TVD differences. So how do you account for that? You also could have interior wells versus edge wells. So if you look at the well on the left-hand side, is the spacing just within it, or do you count the exterior as something different? And then as if we needed some more complications, the spacing might change along the lateral. So maybe along half the lateral, it's constrained, and the other, maybe it's unconstrained. How do we try to account for all those different pieces? So what we're proposing for well spacing, and this is something that I'd love to hear your feedback on what's worked and what hasn't worked, but this will be how spacing is programmed into Whitson X, is that we create a 3D grid along our subject well. And within that grid, we reach out and see where we kind of have that no flow boundary between wells. And if you look at it in a cross-section view, you'll see something like in the bottom left, kind of like a Voronoi diagram where you have the black line at the no flow boundary. So we can say that well then gets that green area, and we can kind of move every foot up the well bore and calculate a 3D volume that well has to drain from. But we probably know that if you look at that diagram, is that area in that top corner really worth as much as losing some area right by your wellbore? Probably not. So we can maybe have something where we have a value based on where those grid cells are compared to our subject well, something like that bottom middle diagram. And it's a good spot to be able to take into data from interference tests or frac modeling to be able to say what sort of shapes make sense there. I love the paper from Hess above where you're looking at for their ADD wells of where do you see the pressure drainage. So a lot of things could help inform what that shape could look like. And then we'll just take the sum of that spacing value then in that 3D grid for our spacing metric. So that kind of leads us to the question of what shape should we start with or what should we try? So I have two maybe common cases. You could start with, is it a penny-shaped frac? Is it nice and round? You have a larger XF, which is maybe typically what you see from a frac model. I did a lot of RTA, so maybe I would say that it looks something like this. And then I was talking with someone that I knew from Midland and talking about what they thought it might look like for the Wolfcamp B. They gave it some thought, and this is the diagram they do for me of what they thought that would look like. And I looked at that and I thought, that must make it really difficult to place wells in your development plan, right? And they said, no, it actually works out really well because the Wolfcamp A above looks just like Oklahoma. So the way that we're going to try to calibrate that spacing from an empirical standpoint is we need to try to normalize for all the other things that are changing. So you have changes in lateral length, depletion, you have completion size changes. How do we try to normalize for all those things so we can just see the impact of spacing on its own? So what we did is we trained a neural network on everything that we could to try to quantify well performance. And then with that trained neural network, we made the prediction on every single well, but at a standard spacing. So now we're accounting for lateral length, frac size, depletion as best as we can, but keeping frac size the same. And then we're going to compare it to the actual well results and say any deviation there we can probably at least partially attribute to spacing. So that gives us a baseline to compare with. And then we're kind of looking to see on tighter wells or at certain geometries, are we seeing more degradation once we've normalized for all the other aspects? Midland Basin gives us a lot of data to be able to look at that from. There's 26,000 wells. And since every well has possible neighbor pairings, there's actually 290,000 interaction pairs that we can look at. So a lot of data there. I'm just going to walk through this very briefly because what you're going to see in the next slide or 2 slides from now is a little bit overwhelming if I just hit you with it. But we'll let every well take its turn sitting right at the origin. So in this case, well A is taking its turn. And then we're going to plot how far the well is in XY distance along there. So you can see where well B would sit. And then if there's a TBD difference, because we notice that being an important aspect in spacing, well C then is going to sit below well A there. When we let well B take its turn, it looks very similar, except C is now a bit further away. So every well gets to basically sit at that origin, and you get to see where the other wells would sit. With that, we'll now turn to the psychoanalysis part of the presentation. What do you see in this ink blot that what do you feel when you look at this? So this is every single well pairing in the Midland Basin. So you can see that collectively, we've tried a lot of different spacings. It's kind of neat. You can see certain patterns here. So for the ones on the far left there, you have very little XY separation, but you have a TVD separation. So those are wells that are stacked on top of each other. We like to stack in Midland Basin. Out at about the 300 to 400 feet, and with a little bit of TVD separation, you can see a high density there in the red. So that's about a 12 or 16 wells per section wine rack pattern. And then at about 8 wells, I kind of have the green spot in the wrong spot there. But you can see at 660 feet, 8 wells per section, you also start to see a lot of density in that landing zone. So, but collectively, a lot of data for every basic spacing combination has been tried. So this is a really good spot for us to be able to calibrate that spacing data. So I'm going to sort it now to just Wolfcamp B wells that have been the subject well. So you don't see the symmetry anymore, but it's because Wolfcamp B is one of the deeper layers. You generally see more wells above. So you're seeing the lower Sprayberries, the Wolfcamp A, the Joe Mills. So this is just Wolfcamp B. Again, we're looking at the neural networks, tried to account for all the other differences that we can. We're going to be looking at the difference between actual and the predicted value and saying, maybe, hopefully, this can be attributed to spacing. So I'm going to kind of try to layer it on here. But what this is this is the sum of, in that block, what does that sum of that residual look like? So if it's in green, it means it's being well predicted, that it doesn't seem to be affected by the spacing. Blue actually means it's outperforming, and red means it's underperforming. So now with this, we can look at, you can see that kind of red block at the 400 feet line. So if you have a well next to you in landing zone at 400 feet, that's pretty bad. That's an obvious statement, but this allows us to kind of see how far do you need to get out before you actually see the spacing not affecting well performance, and does it affect it differently if you're above or below. In this case, for the Wolfcamp B, you can kind of see in that just above the origin to the, I want to say north, but above and out, you can see it's fairly red. So having a well above you is pretty bad for you from a spacing perspective. Interestingly, for me at least, having wells below you didn't seem to be that bad for well performance. So we can use this to help us try to guide what might be that shape of spacing values that matter. So this isn't from a frac model, it's not from a reservoir model. This is just saying, hey, we see a degradation empirically when wells are spaced at these distances or TVD differences that we can then possibly attribute to spacing. So for Wolfcamp B, this is what that diagram would look like. And again, this is not a frac model, it's not a reservoir model. This came from the empirical side to say, here's what the drainage of spacing kind of looks like when we start to see that degradation. But I can tell you this looks roughly like what a Wolfcamp B frac model would look like, albeit I was a little surprised, at least myself, 70 feet down is not very far. So it's It's got pretty high skew upwards there. But we can then use that to say empirically, this is what matches performance the best. And then we can use that in our spacing calculation. So I have the lower Sprayberry here, the exact same approach. The lower Sprayberry doesn't see as much degradation at XY distances, but you see more height growth up and down. And again, not from a frac model, but I can tell you from experience that we do see that when we're doing interference tests or other aspects, that the lower Sprayberry tends to grow up and down. You don't have really any frac barriers there. So these geometries do make sense, but this would be a good spot to be able to QC. Does that work line up with this work? Do we need to try to something in the middle? So now we can see what happens when you use those spacing values and you're running it through that neural network to see how the well performance would look like. So on the left-hand side, I have the Wolfcamp B. I've picked 6 wells arbitrarily, 6 wells per section as a baseline. And what I'm showing in black is the 1-year cum predicted by the neural network when this spacing algorithm is being used. So you could see that more wells per section, bad for 1-year cum, less wells good. That's fairly obvious, but you at least have now, you can have a quantification of how much that would change. And interestingly, and probably intuitively, you can see that it affects EUR more. So the effects of 1 year are something, but it's more muted. You're seeing more of an effect in EUR. So we kind of want to take in both into account when we're making that economic decision. For lower Sprayberry, partially because of the geometry, you see less impact for 1 year and EUR. So you can fit the wells tighter together in the lower Sprayberry without having that degradation. Now, I'm only considering wells kind of in zone here when I'm talking about this sensitivity. If you start to add Joe Mills above the lower Sprayberry, then you start to see an opposite effect where the Joe Mills and the lower Sprayberry feel each other more for that spacing degradation, whereas the Wolfcamp, since it's more contained, doesn't feel those wells above for that spacing aspect. I think this gives us a good way of approaching it from the empirical side of where do we see well spacing actually affecting results. It's something that we want to use alongside with frac models, reservoir models, and say, where do we see convergence? If it came out from the empirical side that it doesn't make sense, we wouldn't want to move forward with that. But you can kind of use those two to combine. And then once you have something you like, you can apply it to every single well across the basin. So this is how currently spacing is being done in Whitson X. So every time you draw a well, it's doing these 3D spacing calculations based on what we've been tuned for the empirical data, and it's rolling into those sensitivities. So our goal is that then when you're doing something like wells per section versus NPV, you have an answer you can trust, you know why you're seeing different results for, say, Wolfcamp B versus lower Sprayberry. And you can tie it back to those shapes and say, this makes sense from an engineering perspective. So we trust where this sensitivity is leading us. So with that, I want to thank you very much and happy to take questions. And if you are curious more about Whitson X, we're sitting over there, happy to give you a show.
Clapping off the stage. Actually had one question over here. Yeah, let's do it.
I've been, thanks for the presentation. It's a great feature. We all know the complexities that neural networks come with. So while everybody's working on different basins, does the model allow us or like the user to change the training data set, or will it be one sample training data set that the model will be using every time it's giving these results?
Good question. So what we do is we focus on a formation within a basin. So we'll train the neural network on just that formation. But we try to leverage, is there learnings that we can have from the other formations that can be applied? So as an example, like GOR tends to trend with formations. So we'll use GOR from one formation to help trend another. But it's also been helpful for some, like Permian, you have a lot of data. So that's where I think like we can calibrate these, test these, develop these. And if you go to a formation within the Permian that has less data, you can leverage some of these learnings so that we're not starting completely blind. Like you don't have to reinvent spacing or lateraling scalars for the Wolfcamp C, where you just don't have enough wells to do that. So we're trying to design it where you can take pieces of one and kind of feed it into another. But there's engineering judgment along with there. So we're trying to use machine learning where we think it fits, but always with a reservoir engineering standpoint. Big claps.
Great job. Just a small ask. It would be very good if, since we have these microphones there, if people can stand up there, it's a little easier for us to kind of navigate the question. We're going to change gears a little bit. So over to SM. Anthony, stage is yours. That was Braden's time, actually. Good, Braden. On time.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Anthony Jimenez, and I'm a reservoir engineer for SM Energy. I primarily focus on the asset planning and development of our Midland Basin assets, and I'm happy to share with you all here today a case study actually from the Midland where we recently altered our completion design strategy, and Whitson really played a key part in how we validated our change, and ultimately, and we'll see this, how we were able to then make a step change decision with our development strategy moving forward. Before we begin, I have to, I'm obligated to say this. I might make some forward-looking statements in this presentation. It's not investment advice, and like all the good engineers that we are in this room, I do encourage you to do your own due diligence. In a presentation of this format, I think it's nice to start with an executive summary. That way we can have a good idea of where this presentation is going to go. So put simply, at a high level, SM Energy over the past 18 months or so has begun strategically testing and incorporating surfactants in our initial completion design. And this is all with the aim of improving our well performance for new wells, new horizontal wells, that is, in the Midland Basin. What we'll show you today is one of the first or early key developments that allowed us to validate this change, and it really gave us a lot of confidence with the surfactant efficacy when applied at the field scale level. And what we'll look at is with the gun barrel development here, it was a rather controlled, almost A/B test, which is pretty uncommon in the field, is what we find. And while I acknowledge what was the independent variable that we changed, we won't go too much into the actual chemistry or the methodology of how we pumped the surfactant for this job. But what I do want to keep in scope and focus on is how did we make use of Whitson and just your fundamental reservoir engineering practices to validate that we are seeing improvement in this well performance? And more importantly, really, how could we directly translate what we're seeing in more of a technical space and translate that into a business recommendation that ultimately we can give to the managers and compel them that, this is something worth thinking about and actually altering our plans for. And the value, it really ties to Whitson, and there are a lot of things that I could say when it relates to value, but if I boil it down to 3 main points, it would be as follows. With Whitson, we are now able to rapidly and conclusively identify this well performance difference. Keywords here being rapidly and conclusively. When you integrate these methodologies or these techniques from the RTA and you pair that in concert with something like your traditional DCA or just traditional production data analysis, it really allows you to reduce that uncertainty in what you're seeing in the field. And if you have these competing technologies or techniques all pointing to the same answer, it allows you to reduce that risk whenever you promote or recommend this change in development strategy. And ultimately, when you pair those two together, what this allows you to do is put together a compelling business recommendation and ultimately reduce that cycle time that it takes to go from experimentation into the field to actually changing your field development strategy. I think that positions us well for this presentation. And I'll just take a step back because I know we're a diverse audience here with a lot of different levels of experience and different basins that we operate in. So I won't assume you know exactly where we operate, but as you can see here in the inverse map, well, let me back up and say at a corporate level or an enterprise level, we are multi-basin. This work, however, is focused in the Permian and more specifically in the Midland Basin. We operate in a few different counties, and we're as far east as eastern Howard County, and then also as far west as Upton and Crane County, where you almost start approaching the Central Basin platform. We have trialed the surfactant at different areas across this basin with pretty repeatable and consistent success. So that's just a testament to some of the good work that the team has been doing. And then, like many others, this is an unconventional play. We are developing it in this multi-bench, cube-like development setting, if you will. And across the formations, we are primarily targeting the Sprayberry and the Wolfcamp. Now, looking forward to the development gun barrel, I mentioned that this was rather unique. And the reason why I mentioned that is for a variety of reasons. But just starting at a high level, as you can see here in this 2640 half-section DSU, we did fully co-develop 9 wells targeting 5 different benches there. And what was nice about this is it was fully co-developed. We didn't have to come and infill offset depletion. And then I didn't span it out further west and east, but if you did do that for 3,000 feet on either direction, you would have seen that at development timing, there were no parents existing, so no existing production, no impacts of depletion. And then really now through almost 2 years of production data, we still don't have any infills on either side of us. So this allowed for us to have a pretty rich data set that didn't get interrupted with a lot of these frac hits that you might see whenever you try to conduct these tests in real field settings. We'll focus primarily on landing zones C through E for this work. What you'll notice is that we tried to keep the gun barrel as symmetrical as possible. So if you were to envision a line right down the middle, as best as we could, and this was intentional, we kept all of the interwell spacings approximately the same. Then all the completion designs that we did as far as stage architecture, fluid loading, proppant loading, all that remained the same. The only thing changing is, as you can see with those green markers, we pump surfactant on the 2 eastern landing zone C and landing zone D wells there. And so we'll compare those against their counterparts in the same zone. And then we'll also look at landing zone E and see if we see any sort of synergistic effect just by being near neighbors to the surfactant wells. While not a focal point for this presentation, I think this is really nice, and a number of people have alluded to this and discussed it today. But this whole process was made a lot easier because of a lot of the work that our IT teams did and consulting with Whitson and being able to make use of our SM data servers, putting those data pipelines into Snowflake, and ultimately getting it into Whitson. You know, we liken this almost to your light switch, right? You don't really care about all the inner workings and how the electricity is flowing through there, but when you hit that switch, you fully anticipate and expect that you'll have light. And that's the same thing here. We don't have to data wrangle anymore or QC our wellbores for hours on end before we even start a project. We're able to get in there, get our calculated bottom hole pressures, and focus on the work that for these engineers is driving the bottom line, and it's impactful. And that is, you know, doing your actual analysis, getting interpretations, and putting together a good recommendation that will help the company. So putting that aside, we'll return now to the results, and we'll start first with the analytical RTA. Just for orientation, when you look at the plot here, this is your standard specialized plot where you have oil rate normalized pressure on the y-axis and the material balance square root time on the x-axis. What I want to show you here is that using RTA, right, although it's something that's tried and true with analytical RTA, we can get a lot of valuable insights. So what I'm showing you here is that with only 4 months of data post-pop, you can start to see some very unique characteristics. First being that landing zone D is characteristically different than landing zone C. You see that? We'll look at it later on, but landing zone C here is more productive. Another thing that you should note here is that irrespective of the landing zone, those surfactant-treated wells are more productive than their counterparts. And that's indicative of the green dots and both of these being below the gray dots. What you should also note is that we can already start making estimations of our linear flow parameter as recent as 120 days, which, you know, if you convert that to material balance time, it's approximately 10, or where I have that black dash line. And another thing that we'll hit on, but it's important to just address up front, is that the onset of linear flow regime, it's at about that x equals 7 on this plot here. And that's important, right? Because that's where you should be fitting your straight line through. So we'll get into more of that. But, you know, the main takeaway on this slide is RTA and convolving rates with pressures give you valuable insights. It gives you a characteristic that you can start to see very early on. And to just drive that point home a little bit more, I recycle the same plot on the right, but now pair it with just your standard semi-log oil rate plot versus producing days. And, you know, if you look at that through 120 days, that's the same amount of data. I could give you that you could make the determination landing zone D is not as productive as landing zone C. Would you be able to then look at landing zone C and definitively say that the surfactant well is doing much better than the non-surfactant well? I think that gets a little bit more, you know, difficult to say definitively, at least through this amount of data. While you do also see that you have approximately 2 months of decline, would you have the confidence to definitively say to your manager what that decline is? Or put another way, how much weight would you put in an EUR estimate looking at just rates alone? And so just want to really drive home the value of analytical RTA. This is nothing new, but when you convolve rates and pressures, you do start to get these unique characteristics, and that is something that we wanted to continue using even if you only have 4 months of production data. So as I mentioned, we made our first sets of linear flow parameter estimations as recent as 4 months post flow back. So you ask yourself, well, is it reliable, or are you just going to revise it drastically once you get a year of production? And this is where it goes back to, if you have good fundamentals, if you look at your diagnostic plots and understand flow regime identification, it can be quite reliable. So this is the actual slope that we put just through one well, so we don't get too messy here, but this is using the linear flow regime identification, fitting your straight line through there. This is what we did at 4 months. And then if I pair that with now more than 18 months of data, you can see we have exceptional agreement. You can see that we're calling the end or the start of the end of linear flow regime at approximately 264 real days. And through all that, we're still seeing exceptional agreement. And I'll pause here to make the point, right? What are we saying with this? What we're saying is that we would have gotten to the same answer with only 4 months of production data as we would if we waited to 9 months, which is 264 days where we saw the end of linear flow. Or what if we waited and looked at just rates alone? Would that be 1 year that we would have to take until we can make this same conclusion? And then take that a step further, you say, well, all that time waiting between 4 months to 9 months or 4 months to 1 year, think about your company and your rig program and your cadence. How many wells and pads did you miss out on that you could have implemented a development strategy change and added value there? Those wells are gone, right? So time value of money, being able to get to the optimized answer sooner, it's invaluable. What we can then do is if we repeat this process, but for all of those wells on there, we can get additional insights. This is just converting those slopes to your linear flow parameter and then comparing them in a bar chart manner. As you might expect, irrespective of the landing zones, we see the surfactant wells do have a higher linear flow parameter than their non-surfactant counterparts. What you also see there is while the absolute value of the landing zone C wells are greater, look at the relative change between your non-surfactant and your surfactant well and landing zone D. That's actually an improvement of 37% with the surfactant. Now there could be a lot of things at play here, but what becomes really important and something that we did extensively before deploying any of this chemical in the field is doing both fluid compatibility testing, but also rock fluid compatibility testing in the lab, and then understanding what that impact will look like here in the field. And there could be a lot of things going on, but we think that that is definitely something that could be taking play. And then finally, just driving home the point here that that early time linear flow parameter estimate, it can be meaningful and it can be reliable, but you must go to the diagnostic plot. You must do your flow regime analysis before you just start fitting lines through here. And if you can do that and you do it repeatably, we have some pretty good reliability in these early linear flow parameter estimates. Now moving forward, what I'm doing here is we also kind of pontificated, well, that landing zone E well, just by being sandwiched between two surfactant wells, will it see any sort of uplift? And from the strictest linear flow parameter estimates here, when you do your specialized plot there, you do see a modest improvement. That's that plus 9%. But we wanted to then go validate that with production data. And when we do that, this is something that we've kind of seen throughout the days today in different flavors. But what I do is I trend here on the y-axis your 360-day cumulative oil production versus linear flow parameter on the x. What you see is a very strong linear correlation. And something to note here is if you focus down to the bottom left where you see the wells E1NS and E2NS, while there is that 9% improvement in linear flow parameter, there's less than a 2% improvement or increase in 360-day cum. So what this leads us to believe, at least at this point, is that that 9%, it is not material when you look at it in a rate perspective or your actual volumes. Now, kind of comparing this to some of the modern modules that Whitson has begun to implement, I mean, it's been in there for a little while now, is your multi-phase flowing material balance. And so that plot there on the left should look very familiar to you all. And you see a lot of the same features where you have that lumping of the landing zone D wells towards the top. You get your landing zone C wells to the bottom. And then both of these, what you notice is that the green data points are below the gray data points. Here you would do your slopes, and from that you could get your contacted pore volumes. And we think that this is something interesting that we can almost use as a surveillance tool or a QC analysis. So just like we did on the previous slide, now instead of doing 360-day cum volumes on the y-axis, we're looking at the oil EUR that we have. And this is the EUR that your asset engineers would do based off of their type wells, based off of their wells per section. So this is kind of, let's call it traditional, right? This is not RTA based or anything. This is more from your conventional asset development. So that's on the y-axis. But when we pair that with what we're gathering from the RTA insights here, the contacted pore volume, we do see again a very nice linear trend line. But if you were to kind of be nitpicky and point out one well, what you might say is that well D1NS, it doesn't really fit the line. And so then that allows you to at least then have this thought-provoking question, maybe talk to your production engineer or consult with the other members on your asset team and say, should that line be lower? Did we have our EURs too high, or is that just within the spread? At least at a minimum, this gives you a starting point for discussion. And whether you revise it down, or I'll just show you if I were to eliminate that, you can see how that linear trend line gets much better, and you see that in the R squared there. So just another way that we can take insights from RTA to continue doing a better job here in the field. And then I'll just wrap it up with this. I won't repeat everything here. I just wanted to highlight that we did make a strategic change to our field development strategies, but that was supported with the work that we did in Whitson. There was a lot of value there to do it rapidly, to do it conclusively, and then to minimize risk by saying, if we spend incrementally more CapEx, we will see a return. And this just highlights how we can continue to be prudent operators in each one of our assets. And as we continue to look at inventory life, how we can make these strategic changes to our development strategy and just continue to maximize the value we get out of these assets. I thank you for your time.
That was a really good presentation. Everybody agrees with me.
Very good presentation, Anthony. Good to see you again. I have a couple of questions. I see a clear trend in data between the wells with surfactant and the wells without surfactant. Did you validate you have similar dispersion in a nearby path where you have similar completion without surfactant between more than 2 wells or more than 1 well? If you see a similar deviation, or you can validate that if you keep the completion and you don't apply the surfactant, you have a similar RTA values. That's one question. And the other one is, if you, in the same part, if you validate with the other benches, if you see differences in the other benches too.
I'll address that second one first.
Yeah.
And the reason why we didn't focus on the landing zones A and B is first for brevity, but secondarily, we didn't see as much interaction whether you were below the surfactant treated well or not. So at least in that shallow section, we didn't see it. Certainly we do see some, at least on the linear flow parameter, in those lower sections where your TVD, it's much more reduced. To your first question, we didn't have a perfect analog. We have wells not right next to it, but right below it to the south. The only challenge there is those wells were developed rather early, so it would be a little bit more difficult to compare that legacy completions with this one. But what does give us some good confidence, if we just go to the gun barrel, I'll try to go to the earlier slide if I can, where it's kind of blown up more here. What did give us a lot of confidence is, like I mentioned, there's nothing on either side of us, right? So presumably, I would expect this landing zone C well, with surfactant or not. I'm looking at the C2S. Sorry, I don't have the pointer here. But that green landing zone C2S well, whether it had surfactant or not, it's half bounded, right? So you would expect performance to be better. But what is quite interesting, and I didn't point it out explicitly, but when we look at the 360-day cum plot, what we notice is that the next green well, that D2S, it's fully bounded, it has surfactant, and at least at 360-day cum, it is outperforming that well further to the west, the D1NS, which is half-bounded with no surfactant. This well's doing better in a fully bounded sense. So it's not exactly a direct comparison, but if you think about what you typically see, you don't usually see a fully bounded well outperforming a half-bounded well.
Very, very interesting to see the strategic change to include the surfactant in your completion design. So here for 2 examples in this DSU, you didn't put a surfactant in the shallow zones. Is it because the sand bench behave differently from the shear bench?
I won't go into a lot of details, but we did extensive testing beforehand that told us we would have the best success where we placed it.
Okay, thank you.
Great presentation. Would you be able to share what the GPT that was used in the surfactant?
I'm sorry, I can't. I can't go anything into how we pumped it.
Last question from Graham.
Slide 16 showed the EUR, but what method did you use to get the EUR?
Method to get the EUR, yes. And so this is why I wanted to be explicit there in the subheading saying traditional DCA. This is from a lot of the work that the engineers would have done with their type well analysis, understanding their degradation curve. So this is not based in RTA. This is what we would have had almost at your AFE timing.
I was curious if the recovery factor method connected to that FMB would be another EUR technique.
I thought the same thing earlier whenever that was there. I agree.
On slide 4, when you talked about everything was fully co-developed. No, yeah, that one. Yeah. When everything was fully co-developed, were they also flowed back the same way, or were they all flowed back at once?
Correct. Right. You know, there might be hour delay just because we want to make sure that we're not going to see something crazy at surface and facilities can handle it. But by and large, We didn't get too cute with flowback strategy. They're all the same, and we try to open them up as much as we can. And they were all, right next to each other. So yeah, nothing too, drastic to outline there.
Round of applause. Appreciate that. Great stuff. Thank you. We're gonna continue on this fun reservoir train. That's an engaging topic. The next presenter we have imported from Oklahoma City. Gonna get Mark on stage from Continental. Hopefully this thing, the clicker works.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
So yeah, my name's Mark Dunseith. I'm a reservoir engineer with Continental Resources. And today I'm gonna present some work I did in partnership with our Permian asset team and our completions group on using RTA and some detailed numerical simulation to optimize our stage architecture. So this is the outline. I'm just going to kind of step through the process I went through. This flow chart here is our internal process for optimization studies. I'm sure you've seen something similar to this before. But one of the things I kind of want to talk about today is at least in my experience, getting all the way through this process and kind of closing the loop on making design changes and knowing if you made a significant impact or not with at least with any certainty is often difficult. Lots of uncertainty, as a lot of the other presenters have shared today. So I'm just going to talk about some of my learnings that I had going through the process. So a little bit of background on the project. We were kind of in a cost focus mode for a while, and that ended up driving some of our design changes. In general, it was trending us toward longer stages, wider cluster spacing. And so we started to have questions about if this was impacting the performance, especially on the early time. Our EUR expectations were, or our EUR predictions were a little closer to what we were expecting. And this is my favorite Whitson chart. We were kind of trending toward this bottom quadrant here where we had lower LFPs, but decent contacted oil in place. And so we were really thinking that especially the cluster spacing, going to wider cluster spacing was hurting our early time performance. So to evaluate this, I went through this process of doing a full RTA study on around 100 wells, a little over 100 wells, and just doing simple comparisons of linear flow parameter and contacted oil in place between like well sets. I went through a design process using ResFrac, coupled geomechanical and reservoir simulator to see if we could do anything to improve. And then, of course, you always have to prove it in the field. So we set up a couple of field trials. We were very intentional about how we did that to make sure we could get a clear result to be able to drive that decision. So some of the constraints, don't change well spacing. You might think that's probably the first thing you would look to if your well performance is not where you want. Maybe you need to widen out your spacing a little bit to have less competition between the wells. But we wanted to see if there was anything we could do before kind of using the nuclear option. Obviously, it needs to be economic. Generally, improving well performance costs money, but it has to be worth the expense. And it also needs to be practical to translate across different operational setups. We had a mix of zipper operations and simul-frac operations, etc. And of course, it needs to be done quickly. The rig schedule doesn't wait. And this is really where Whitson came in very handy with all the integration work that our team has done to have all of this data ready to go so I could really get through the RTA process and then get onto the more time-consuming simulation work. So I just wanted to talk a little bit on the RTA methodology. One of the things I've found is, being consistent in how you do things is one of the most important aspects. There might be different interpretations for these plots, but as long as you're consistent with how you do it, you can generally get a pretty good result that can help you drive a decision. So just a little quick info on the reservoir. So this is undersaturated volatile oil. It's a pretty narrow GOR window, which is helpful. We have really good initial pressure estimates from the IPR method, and we also have a very large DFIT data set that backs that up. And this is a 3-bench development in the Delaware Basin. So first off, on the multi-phase flowing material balance, the way I picked these plots was I kind of focused on this earliest kind of shallow slope before you get a deviation with gas breakout. Generally, that occurred around 50 to 100 mass material balance time days in these wells. And that's a very consistent signature, at least for this asset. I do struggle with this plot a little bit, so I'd love to hear how others are using it. It seems like it can be very sensitive, but I was able to get some good results out of it for this project. On the linear flow picking, I made an effort to pick the first identifiable linear flow using the log-log diagnostic plot and the square root of time. I also forced a zero intercept, and I did check these LFPs with numerical RTA, and I got directionally the same result. I decided to go with the analytical results in the end just because there's fewer assumptions that go into it. It's easier to explain to non-practitioners, and it's nice to be able to pull up the plots and see the differences in the wells. It's quicker for me to do, but again, it's only really possible when you kind of have a narrow range of GOR and other nonlinear effects like gamma and rel perms. So after that, compile the results and do some statistical comparisons. Before that, it's also good to check your RTA against your common production metrics. This is just downtime removed production at different time steps, 3, 6, and 12 months. And then I'm just showing LFP and contacted oil in place from that analytical work. And there's some scatter. There always kind of should be. I get nervous if these look too good after the first pass. I always expect there to be some outliers to investigate. But in general, these are the correlations I would kind of expect to see. You have LFP correlated to a little better correlated to the early time steps, and oil in place starts to correlate a little better to the later time steps. So moving on to the unit comparisons, one of the hardest things, especially in the Permian, is comparing like units. There's obviously lots of wells, lots of different vintages, stem sizes, different well spacings and development patterns, different orientations to maximum stress and offset depletion, et cetera. So we were really intentional with how we grouped these wells and compared them. So this is just one example. This is maybe the most extreme example we have here, but we started to see this kind of consistent pattern where the unit that has wider cluster spacing and longer stages was significantly degraded on LFP, and also this is your PNR versus CUME, versus the unit that has tighter cluster spacing and shorter stages. This was a fairly consistent trend in LFP. The oil in place, contacted oil in place, sometimes we saw differences one way or the other, but in general, there was a lot of overlap in those distributions and it seemed to be less impacted. So that fit with our thesis so far. On the design side, we had a pretty good set of diagnostics that we had gathered over the asset. We had some fiber optic data for volume to first response and number of frac hits. We had a really robust set of interference tests across the asset in different areas and across different stem designs. One thing that's important is that all of the wells do communicate, low to moderate, but not extreme levels of communication if you kind of go by the published MPI levels. And so that was another indication that spacing probably wasn't our problem. We also had some perforation imaging. We had really high cluster efficiency, mostly across the board. And critically, we still maintained 100% cluster efficiency when we started to tighten things up. But we did see, as we started to add more and more clusters to a stage, that the efficiency started to drop, as well as the uniformity of the clusters that were being treated. So again, we used the coupled physics modeling to integrate all of this data and calibrated the model to it, and then ran a series of sensitivities and economic analysis. And importantly, in all of these, the only thing that we're changing is the stage architecture. The volumes and pounds per foot are staying the same, and the spacing is staying the same. So the new design we came up with, we ended up reducing our cluster spacing by about 25%, reduced our cluster spacing to increase the total number of clusters across the lateral by about 25%. We also implemented a rate per cluster target, and we did that to stay kind of on a uniformity plateau. If you look at the chart in the bottom right, this is rate per cluster versus the uniformity index from the treatment. And our legacy design was maybe on the plateau, but kind of borderline to where we started to see that drop in uniformity. And so we increased that to make sure we stayed on that plateau. And so with those two parameters, you can solve for the stage length based on the available rate for each well. And our expectation for improvement, you can see down here in this middle chart. So the blue trend here is if you have a fixed cluster spacing and you're changing your stage length. So the total number of clusters along the lateral doesn't change. as they're changing it, the stage length is changing at the same ratio as the cluster spacing. And so it does show a little bit of a positive increase going to shorter stages, again, kind of due to this uniformity aspect. But the one we were after was this orange trend. So this is the cluster spacing. So here's our base design, and then here's our new design. And this was about a 12% uplift from the base design. And importantly, it only requires about a 3% uplift to break even on the economics. So we were pretty sure that we could make money doing this and improve the well performance in a way that made sense. The other important thing is we did expect this uplift to diminish over time, which again is aligned with the RTA work of similar contacted oil in place. It's a relatively high perm reservoir, so it would make sense that you would see kind of that acceleration aspect, and then the trend, the cum time trends would converge toward EUR. So a minor EUR uplift, but not significant. So the field trials we set up, we did it a couple different ways to try to make sure we could get an actionable result. So we did a few full unit trials. So these were full co-developed